were by best estimates about 15 people resident in the encampment at Lamport Stadium when the officials arrived there after plenty of notice to try to clear that encampment. Some of them had agreed to accept indoor housing. But there then seemed to be many more people materialized there, and they engaged in activities that resulted in the assaulting of police officers, the throwing of bottles and rocks, and I find this unacceptable in our city. Unacceptable. I don't know who the people were exactly, but it was just not acceptable.
Toronto police and city officials dismantled the homeless encampment at Lamport Stadium today, evicting dozens of people who've been living there since the beginning of the pandemic. The mayor says the city offered residents space in shelters and hotels because the encampments, according to the mayor, are unsafe, unhealthy, and unlawful.
Advocates say those living in this encampment and others in the city aren't trespassing, and they're urging the city to take a different approach. To discuss what happened today and what's next for those who were forced to move, Street Pastor Doug Hatlem, lawyer Estair Van Wagner, an associate professor at Osgoode Hall, and Laura MacDonald, a registered nurse with Regent Park Community Health Centre. Thanks to all of you for being with us tonight. Doug, we'll start with you. I understand you were at this location today. Tell us a little bit about what you experienced and what you saw.
Well, I think the Toronto police and the city have showed their true colors. They're willing to use incredible levels of violence to keep people from their right to housing. The city does not have space to put everybody inside. We've got FOI data that shows almost 14,000 people over the last 4 months were told no when they called central intake for a bed. The mayor is just flatly lying, as has become his custom. There were no bottles of rocks thrown. All the violence was on one side. The people with horses marching over people, the people with guns, the people dragging women across the pavement, the people roughly and violently assaulting a homeless person and then charging him with assaulting them. What did he do? Hit their knuckles with his face? It's unacceptable the way the city's behaving. They don't have room for everybody. Their own data shows it. 117 people a night are turned away. And so the city, but we're going to keep winning. We're going to keep the city from violating these people's human rights. And so they're going to have to come up with another strategy. Eventually, they're going to have to come to the bargaining table in good faith, which they haven't done yet.
Doug, we constantly hear the city saying that it is illegal to live in parks and that the city says, you can't happen, it's unlawful, unsafe, etc. Are you suggesting that they have a legal right to be there and that it is definitely safe to be there?
They have a legal right to be there. Leilani Fari, the former UN rapporteur on housing, has talked extensively about this. The UN rights protected. The Toronto Charter itself protects the right to housing, and that in this case means tents. There is nowhere else for these people to go. We have a housing crisis in this city, and it's safer often than being indoors. It's people making a choice not to get COVID. It's people making a choice not to be in overcrowded shelters where there's violence, where there's way more overdose deaths than there are outside. And, if the city is worried about some genuine safety issues, as we are, then they'll come in good faith and figure out how we can mitigate those issues, how we can take a harm reduction approach, rather than coming in there and saying, you're unsafe, we're going to beat you.
We just heard from the mayor in that clip from this afternoon's press conference. Also want to read a portion of a statement that we got from a spokesperson for the City of Toronto, Brad Ross. He says, living outside has a significant negative impact on overall health and the well-being of people. Encampments are not an indefinite solution to unsheltered homelessness, and the health outcomes for people who stay outside are complex and serious. Streets to Home staff have visited Lamport 107 times since January, offering safe inside space and services. By coming inside to a shelter, hotel, or into supportive housing, people are provided with a number of supports, including a housing worker, meals, laundry, showers, harm reduction, and medical assistance. Laura, I want to bring in you now. What are some of the challenges, the health challenges that people that are living in these encampments are facing, and are they better off from a health perspective being somewhere that they don't want to be, i.e. a shelter or a hotel?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question. My experience in working with people in the downtown East End is that most people are really good at knowing where they will be safe and going where they will be safest. Obviously, there are challenges from a health perspective with living outdoors. And like Doug mentioned, those are challenges that can be mitigated, and then there are opportunities to mitigate. If the city had the willingness to, redeploy some of the water trucks and toilet facilities and staffing to do sanitation work in some of these parks that would normally be, being used for big public outdoor gatherings these days, that would be a really helpful strategy in mitigating some of those health issues.
Estair, can you speak to the legal side of this again? Doug talked about the UN, Human Rights Code that sort of the city seems to cover, but the city keeps coming out and saying it's illegal. If it's illegal, is there perhaps a case that the people in the encampment today could raise against the police and against the city for how it was handled today? Some people, I think, may be watching this and they're very confused about the legalities and laws around encampments in parks.
Yeah, I think the most important starting point in the legality is that these residents of encampments are rights holders, and they're rights holders under Canadian law. They have rights protected under human rights codes, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and under international law that Doug referred to. So the UN Special Rapporteur last March released a national protocol on the rights of encampment holders in Canada. Leilani Farha has set out a roadmap for Canadian cities in how they respond to encampments. And I can tell you that those rules set out in there, those protocols, are the opposite of what we saw today. They put the rights of encampment holders first. Those rights include the right to erect shelter to survive. They include the distinct rights of Indigenous people. They include the right to ongoing and meaningful engagement. And that's something that we've really seen lacking from the City of Toronto here. Instead, we've seen violence. We've seen forced displacement. We have seen a lack of listening to what people are saying they need when it comes to safe and adequate housing. And of course, people have the right to free and informed consent about what kind of housing offers they want to accept. And they need to know whether those housing offers meet their individual needs. So yes, I think there is an ongoing challenge, in fact, under Section 7 and Section 15 to the treatment of encampments by the City of Toronto. And we've seen Canadian courts protect the right to erect shelter when the city fails to provide adequate housing. And in the context of a pandemic, the safety of shelters, never mind the issues with the adequacy of the spaces, is a real and pressing concern for the city. And it should indicate to them that they are vulnerable to a legal challenge.
Doug, I want to ask you, the city says that these encampments are unhealthy and unsafe. Those are the words that the mayor used today, citing things like fires and explosions that could cause further harm and even death. What approach could the city be taking to help mitigate some of those particular issues? I know that we heard about water trucks and bringing in some resources and that type of thing. What about from a safety standpoint and the way in which structures are erected in these parks and helping to get rid of some of those problems?
Yeah, well, for instance, ESN, Encampment Support Network, Sanctuary, and a burn researcher from a local hospital who works in the burn unit have worked to put together a training PDF and fire safety protocols, and then to engage encampment residents in training sessions. And we would like to see that go out more widely. If we had city support for doing that, we could do it in much greater fashion. That's what we do inside houses. We don't tell people you can't have Christmas trees. Mm-hmm. We figure out how to make Christmas trees safer. We don't tell people you can't cook indoors. We figure out how smoke alarms and other kinds of things can make indoor cooking safe. And that's the kind of thing that could be done in encampments. No, they're not the permanent solution, but the city is probably a decade away on their current pace, and much more than that from having adequate housing for all. So until then, we're going to have the problem of people living outdoors. And instead of trying to force people into ravines, instead of trying to invisibilize people, they need to take an approach that says, let's figure out how to make this as safe as we possibly can.
Very important discussion. Thanks to all three of you for joining us tonight.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.